Our guest is Myria Georgiou, professor of London School of Economics and Political Science and a career presenter. Hello, welcome to our studio. Please, may I ask you, you are presenting here your research project. Could you sum up the results, the outcome of this research you're presenting here in career?
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am presenting a project within a project. So the whole panel we're presenting is a bigger project that we have developed at the London School of Economics at the Department of Media and Communications, when we look at the three different elements of the communication architecture of the so-called refugee crisis. So we're looking at the way that media across Europe have covered the crisis. We're looking at the politics of reception at the borders of Europe, and we're looking at the visual representations of refugees and migrants in Europe's media spaces. My own presentation today focuses on the networks of solidarity at the borders of Europe, and I'm looking at what I call the double predicament of the networks of solidarity, networks that are informal, that they have no financial support apart from local populations, and these are networks that unconditionally supported refugees and migrants as they were arriving in many numbers in Europe, and they were covering the needs which the state, Europe, and often humanitarian organizations were not covering.
So if I understand it correctly, could you just tell us then which media were covering it in a way, and from different media, which media were, let's say, rather pro-immigrant or anti-immigrant, or where also? It's like that. For example, now here in the Czech Republic, the attitude, of the public is rather anti-immigrant. So if you have a comment on that, why so, and how media then cover this topic, from some state which is pro-immigrant, how it varies?
We have looked at 8 different European countries of the East and West, and the North and the South. So we have a comparison across Europe, but we also have a temporal comparison, which is important in answering your question. So we looked at the coverage of the so-called refugee crisis at 3 different stages of the events in 2015. So we started by looking at the first moments where many refugees, especially Syrians, arrived. Then we looked at the media coverage after the drowning of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, and then we looked at the way the media covered the refugee crisis after the Paris terrorist attacks. So part of the answer to your question is to say that the narratives of the media and the pro and anti-migrant sentiment changed over time. So the moment after, and the days after the iconic image of the drowned boy, most of the media became much more empathetic and supportive of refugees. But then soon after, in November and after the Paris attack, we saw a shift in Europe's media across the range and across regions, with much more skepticism and fear towards the newcomers taking over. So we have that change that might explain also what you're describing now as the anti-migration sentiment in the Czech Republic. So what we see, especially after the Paris attacks, is more and more an anti-migrant sentiment in the media. We have regional differences as well. The Czech Republic is in the face of the humanitarian, the more kind of friendly humanitarian narrative. It was not, you might be surprised, but it was actually not hostile. The Czech press, it wasn't enormously hostile towards refugees. Rather, in many cases, the Czech press had some commonalities with the German press, which was looking at understanding the causes of the crisis and looking at Europe's responsibilities as well. But of course, as I said, that was a very specific moment in the history of the crisis. And then we saw more and more, and increasingly in the Czech media as well, that kind of hostile atmosphere taking over.
Okay. I see. Well, and also, for example, Brexit, was it a moment of sort of a shifting of the migration or the attitude towards the migration crisis? Or how?
Well, there are many debates and many discussions on the role of the media in the way that the British public voted on Brexit. And it seems that the sentiment, the anti-migration sentiment in the British media in the build-up to Brexit must have supported a lot of this vote of fear against migrants, which ended up being one of the main elements of the debate.
And afterwards, after the polls?
After the polls, I think the British press was divided. A lot of the many outlets of the mainstream media in the UK were puzzled because they didn't believe that people would vote for Brexit. So I think it was a moment of reflection. While another fraction of the press, the most populist press, perhaps the most right-wing press, emphasized even more their role in supporting successfully Brexit and pushed for yet even more control of migration, which is something that continues now. And unfortunately, this politics of fear is spreading both in the UK and across other parts of Europe.
Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you stay tuned for other interviews.